Donald Trump might have expected resistance from rivals, but it's the smaller allies quietly slipping away that are catching him off guard.
Developing right now, a number of countries are updating their travel advisories to the U.S. following the Trump administration's ongoing immigration crackdown and recent announcement the U.S. is considering an updated travel ban on 43 countries.
The signs are there if you look. Empty shifts at factories, contracts canceled overnight, stock charts swinging like wrecking balls. Canada's new trade alliances are rewriting the rules of the game, leaving America's giants suddenly vulnerable. It's the opening act of a storm that could gut entire communities. Workers, farmers, truckers, everyone tied to cross-border commerce now stands on uncertain ground.
Now, these closures aren't just affecting smaller retail and businesses. Big corporations are also downsizing.
A Walmart in Coon Rapids will shut its doors later this month.
The system we thought was unshakable is trembling. And the only question nobody can answer yet is this: how close is the fall? Walmart, the retail empire, watching its northern kingdom crumble. The dominoes start falling with America's retail giant. Walk through Walmart's massive distribution centers that line the Canadian border. Warehouses stretching beyond the horizon, like industrial cities. Conveyor systems that could move entire populations' worth of goods in a single day. Loading docks where trucks line up like steel dominoes, waiting to carry American products into Canadian markets that once seemed as reliable as sunrise. Walmart turned this cross-border infrastructure into a retail empire that redefined North American commerce. 47 distribution facilities optimized specifically for Canadian delivery routes. 18,000 employees whose paychecks depend entirely on moving American goods across that invisible line separating two nations. Annual Canadian revenue, $3.8 billion. That's not quarterly pocket change. That's the difference between growth and corporate stagnation for a company already fighting Amazon's digital dominance and shifting consumer behaviors that threaten traditional retail models across every market segment. But Canada's new partnerships with 11 nations are about to rewrite the entire retail game with surgical precision. South Korean electronics manufacturers can now ship directly to Canadian retailers, without American distribution networks taking their cut. Japanese consumer goods bypass Walmart's warehouses entirely through streamlined Pacific shipping routes. Australian agricultural products skip American processing facilities and transportation systems, flowing directly to Canadian shelves. Walmart's competitive advantage, geographic proximity and established infrastructure, is evaporating like steam in winter air. Internal documents leaked to industry publications paint a picture that should terrify shareholders. Canadian market penetration, down 34% in preliminary projections. Distribution center consolidation now under emergency review as facility utilization rates plummet. Workforce transition scenarios prepared for northern facilities that might not generate enough throughput to justify continued operations. This isn't corporate speculation about future conditions. This is happening right now, while Walmart executives calculate whether decades of infrastructure investment might become worthless overnight. The company's stock volatility tells the story with brutal precision. Daily swings of 7 to 9% as investors desperately try to calculate the value of a continental retail giant that might lose access to 1/3 of the continent within just 18 months. Wall Street analysts whisper about fundamental restructuring scenarios that could reshape American retail geography. But here's the deeper cut that keeps Walmart executives awake at night, staring at spreadsheets that no longer make sense. When you build an entire supply chain ecosystem around one critical relationship, and that relationship fractures due to forces beyond your control, you don't just lose revenue streams. You lose the machinery that generates those revenue streams. How do you retool 47 distribution centers for markets you never prepared for? How do you retrain 18,000 employees for supply chains that don't exist yet and might never exist? The mathematics are brutal in their simplicity. Every lost Canadian contract creates ripple effects that cascade backward through Walmart's entire American retail infrastructure. Like dominoes falling in slow motion, suppliers who provided products exclusively for Canadian-bound shipments must find new markets or close operations. Trucking companies that specialized in cross-border logistics face route eliminations. Small American towns that grew around Walmart distribution hubs watch their largest employer quietly calculate exit strategies. This is just the beginning of America's retail apocalypse, But if America's largest retailer is bleeding Canadian market share, imagine what's happening to manufacturers who built their entire production strategies around guaranteed northern access. General Motors, the auto giant facing continental gridlock. When retail crumbles, manufacturing follows. Detroit used to mean something that echoed across continents. Assembly lines roaring with industrial symphony. Workers streaming through factory gates like rivers of American determination. The heartbeat of American manufacturing pounding out vehicles that conquered global markets, and defined automotive excellence. General Motors embodied that legacy with steel and precision. Their components sit in vehicles across North America, like DNA woven into the automotive bloodstream. Canadian automotive plants depend on GM's precision-engineered parts, like clockwork depends on springs that never fail. $2.10 billion in annual Canadian automotive sales. 23 manufacturing facilities optimized specifically for Canadian demand patterns. Supply chains calibrated down to the hour for just-in-time delivery across the border that once united integrated economies. Now picture those assembly lines, stuttering to a halt, like machines running out of fuel. Canada's new partnerships include South Korea and Japan, two nations that manufacture automotive components with the same precision GM built its reputation on, often at lower costs, and now, with preferential trade status that American companies no longer enjoy. The mathematics are brutal in their automotive specificity. A Canadian auto manufacturer can now source Mitoyatsu brake systems from South Korea with a 17% tariff advantage over American suppliers. Engine components from Japan arrive with regulatory fast-tracking, while GM parts crawl through slower, more expensive channels that add weeks to delivery timelines. But here's the deeper cut that threatens GM's entire continental strategy. General Motors didn't just build factories to serve Canadian sales markets. They constructed their entire North American production strategy around integrated manufacturing networks. Components manufactured in Michigan get shipped to Ontario for specialized assembly, then returned to the United States as finished automotive systems. That integration, the foundation of decades of profitable continental production, is about to become GM's greatest liability. Canadian facilities are already receiving inquiries from South Korean parts manufacturers about joint ventures that eliminate American suppliers entirely. Japanese automotive companies are touring Canadian factories, measuring floor space, calculating shipping distances, and proposing partnerships that would reshape the entire North American automotive supply chain. Industry insiders whisper about the Great Reshuffling, a fundamental realignment of automotive manufacturing that could leave General Motors isolated from their largest integrated production partner. Internal GM documents reveal the corporate panic behind polished public statements. Canadian facility integration strategies under emergency review, supply chain redundancy planning elevated to crisis-level priority. But the ripple effects extend far beyond GM's boardrooms into the heart of American automotive communities. When Canadian automotive contracts disappear, the effects cascade backward through GM's entire supply network like seismic waves. Steel suppliers in Pennsylvania watch orders evaporate as Canadian production shifts to Asian partners. Rubber manufacturers in Ohio calculate facility closures as tire contracts move overseas. Electronics producers in Texas see their largest automotive contracts disappear into alternative networks. GM's CEO called an emergency board meeting last month. The agenda contained one item: strategic response to Canadian market disruption. Stock analysts call it an existential crisis disguised as a trade dispute, one that could fundamentally alter American automotive manufacturing. Small towns across America's auto heartland, where GM operates major plants, are watching their largest employer calculate whether continued operations make financial sense in a world where their primary partner is choosing different suppliers. If America's automotive giant is losing its grip on continental integration, what happens to the companies that feed America's energy infrastructure? ExxonMobil, the energy titan, losing its continental lifeline. While manufacturing stutters, America's energy backbone begins to crack. Oil derricks, silhouetted against endless skies like monuments to American energy independence. Refineries sprawling across landscapes like industrial cities that never sleep. pipelines stretching across continents, carrying the liquid energy that powers modern civilization and defines geopolitical strength. American energy independence has been a political rallying cry for decades, but ExxonMobil built its continental empire on something very different: energy interdependence with Canada, a relationship that seemed as permanent as geological formations. ExxonMobil's Canadian operations generate $4.2 billion annually through integrated energy networks. Their pipeline systems carry Canadian crude to American refineries, with efficiency that redefined continental energy logistics. Their processing facilities transform Canadian natural gas into the heat for American homes and the power for American industries across the heartland. It seemed like the perfect continental marriage. Canada supplied abundant resources. America provided advanced refinement capacity and global distribution networks. But now, that marriage is filing for divorce, and the settlement could bankrupt American energy strategies. Canada's new partnerships include Norway, a nation that rivals Canada in energy exports and technological innovation; the United Kingdom, offering advanced energy technologies and distribution networks that bypass American infrastructure entirely. And the real shock? It comes from a direction analysts never anticipated: Australia. While American companies treated Canada as a resource pipeline, Australian firms are proposing true partnerships. They're investing to keep processing and value-added refinement inside Canada while opening direct access to Asian markets. Canadian crude that once flowed south into ExxonMobil pipelines is being redirected to new refineries built with Australian investment and European technology. Natural gas that powered American facilities is now fueling Canadian industrial expansion, using Norwegian innovations that eliminate American middlemen completely. Internal ExxonMobil projections paint a stark picture: Canadian crude access reduced by 43% in just 18 months. Refinery capacity utilization dropping to 58% of optimal levels. Pipeline revenues collapsing so fast they require emergency restructuring just to keep systems operational. And then comes the second wave, the pricing collapse. ExxonMobil's competitive advantage depended on stable Canadian supply. Without it, their refineries cannot compete with facilities that now enjoy alternative supply chains secured through Canada's new partnerships. Stock prices have already dropped 21% since these announcements went public. Analysts call it the beginning of continental energy market fragmentation, a shift that could reshape North American energy economics for an entire generation. The CEO issues a statement: "We remain optimistic about long-term partnership opportunities with all continental allies." Industry insiders interpret it very differently: desperation disguised as diplomacy. And the ripple effects stretch far beyond ExxonMobil boardrooms. Refinery workers in Texas face layoffs as Canadian crude supplies dwindle. Pipeline crews across the Midwest watch their primary revenue source redirect toward other destinations. Small towns built around energy infrastructure face a terrifying new question: what happens when the foundations of their economy shift north without them? As America's energy partnerships dissolve, the agricultural foundations that feed both nations now face their own existential crisis. Cargrill, the agriculture giant watching harvest profits disappear. Feeding the storm, amber waves of grain stretching beyond the horizon. Cornfields rising like oceans of green. Farmers who fed the world with calloused hands and quiet determination. Agriculture has always been America's backbone, but even the strongest backbone can snap. For decades, Canadian buyers were the reliable outlet for American agricultural exports: wheat, corn, soybeans, beef, poultry, truckloads, crossing the border daily, transforming harvest into profit. $29 billion in annual agricultural exports flowed north. That pipeline is closing. Canada's new trade agreements have opened the floodgates for global competition. Australian beef arrives on Canadian shelves tariff-free. Brazilian soybeans are offloaded from Pacific cargo ships with preferential treatment. European grain imports bypass American suppliers entirely. The numbers are brutal. Early projections suggest a 41% collapse in American agricultural exports to Canada within 2 years. For farmers running on razor-thin margins, that's not a decline, that's an extinction event. Consider the ripple effects. A farmer in Iowa loses his Canadian contracts. His grain elevator reduces operations. The trucking company that hauled his shipments cuts routes. The small-town mechanic who serviced those trucks closes his doors. Entire rural economies unravel from a single broken link in the supply chain. And it's not speculation, it's already happening. Dairy farmers in Wisconsin report losing long-term Canadian buyers to European competitors. Pork producers in Illinois are receiving termination notices from Canadian processors shifting to Brazilian suppliers. Grain cooperatives in Kansas are closing silos that once stored wheat destined for Canadian mills. The system we thought unshakable is trembling. Wall Street barely notices, but small-town America feels it in every empty barn, every silent field, every foreclosure notice tacked onto a farmhouse door. And here's the darkest cut. Agriculture isn't just economics, it's culture, it's communities, it's the very identity of rural America. When those ties snap, when Canadian markets vanish, farmers don't just lose income, they lose purpose. And communities built on generations of agricultural tradition face a question no economist can answer. What happens when the land of abundance can no longer feed itself? From Walmart's shelves to GM's factories, Exxon's pipelines to Cargill's fields, Microsoft's servers to JP Morgan's vaults, and Caterpillar's machines. The cracks are spreading everywhere. What we're watching isn't a trade dispute. It's the unraveling of a system America thought would last forever. If Canada's partnerships mature as expected, these 7 companies won't just lose profits. They'll lose the very structures that kept them dominant. And when those dominoes fall, the impact won't stop at boardrooms. It'll hit workers, farmers, truckers, engineers, and entire towns built on industries now standing on shaky ground. So the question isn't whether the US economy is being tested. The question is, how much time is left before the fall? America loses its closest ally. It won't just be a trade failure. It will be a generational turning point. If this story opened your eyes, hit like, tap subscribe, and ring the bell. Because what's coming next could change everything. This is KG Statements, and I'll see you in the next episode.